So Jay, let's get to the meat of it. In your model of the world and from all of your research and thinking and studying on the matter, who is really in charge? Who is really running the entire show?
Ultimately, I don't think we can make sense of things without a spiritual worldview. I think we need to go beyond just the domain of explaining how there could be so much coordination, so much evil, so much degeneracy being promoted in a coordinated way across the world without expanding it beyond just the human realm. So I certainly recognize the importance of power blocks and different geopolitical factions and this kind of stuff. There's no doubt that that's a big part of this game. But one of the ways that I kind of inadvertently got into that was researching the world wars of the 20th century, reading big geopolitical tomes like Tragedy and Hope. And then you start to realize that these power blocks are behind the wars. They're behind economic booms and crashes. And they really have a hand in a lot of these things. I'm not saying they run everything, but there is, I think, a dominant Western power structure in the human sphere that has the upper hand in terms of the globe. And then I think beyond that, there is also a spiritual understanding of this that I think the Bible makes more sense of. I know you mentioned David Icke the other day. You mentioned Icke and the Cheetah Ori, but I think more a better explanation than archons is the biblical presentation. So I'll give David Icke credit for understanding that it seems to go beyond the human domain. But I think the biblical explanation is better than the sort of Gnostic presentation that he has.
So when, and I know we don't have hours to explain how the unseen connects with the seen, but in terms of the seen, a lot of people think that the president of a country, he's the one who rules the country, that the buck stops with him. He has power. Mm-hmm. And I think that through your work, you argue that no, it's not him. He's something of a pawn. So if a president of a country, a prime minister of a country doesn't have power over that country, then who would you say does?
Well, yeah, the way that I got into that was actually inadvertently as well, because if you study topics like banking, if you study topics like money printing, the philosophy of money, economics, you start to realize that there's nothing new to the notion of powers in the background. The idea that there are powers behind the throne. If we go back to the times of the Middle Ages, kings, nobility, this kind of, you start to realize that there have always been, shadow players. I'm sure everybody maybe saw some parts of Game of Thrones. If you remember the bald guy, Varys, right? He's one of the powers behind the throne. He's very manipulative. He's able to manipulate people. That's an archetype of a character that's existed pretty consistently in history. So many works that are pretty mainstream ultimately come to vindicate this idea that shadow government or shadow banking or these kinds of things are not new ideas. They've been around for a long time. It's just that in the modern propagandized world, especially in the West, we aren't told about that. You really have to be at the more academic level, people studying for international relations, getting their PhD in that, or getting a high level banking position before you start to learn about how the world really works. In fact, some of the think tanks, the big, powerful RAND Corporation, Brookings Institute, Carnegie, they will actually have people come and lecture future and prospective CEOs on this very thing, how the world really works. And they don't really care about it coming out because they know that most people in their mind are not really going to figure this stuff out. I mean, who's going to read Brzezinski? Who's going to read, Jacques Attali? Who's going to read Kissinger, right? Mostly just the sort of academic governmental class of people. So once you're in the academic realm, if you're doing that kind of graduate style work, that's where you get exposed to a lot of this material and even some of the people.
And for those of you in the chat who are leaving super chats, I hope to get to them after, but I don't want to ruin the flow of what we have right now. So Jay, with these powers, what are the main institutions that they use to control not just an individual country, but multiple countries at the same time? Right. Is there some kind of force or organization that helps them to coordinate, that helps them to stay on the same page, to implement the agendas that they want?
That's a great question. I don't have any problem really with the pyramid model or structure. In fact, somebody put out an infographic a few months ago. I've used it in a lot of my streams. You don't have to pull it up, but if anybody wants to, they can find it. I'm sure it's the one that shows all of the people who are heads of executives of mainstream media corporations and the heads of those same people who go to Bilderberg and those same people who go to the CFR meetings, right? So it's the exact same people who are seemingly just one side of the pyramid, so to speak, just in media, and they all go to the same international, very powerful events. And so these kinds of international steering committees that David Rockefeller bragged about setting up in his memoirs, those are one example of how this is coordinated in a global way. And that's just media. So there's also meetings for the banking industry. There's also meetings like this for big pharma or medicine, right? So we can see it across the spectrum in these different areas of life. The same thing happens for academia, for education. These big global confabs have been going on for a long time. And that's just one of the ways, steering committees, as they're called. But there's also NGOs, foundations, think tanks. These are very powerful. I mentioned a minute ago things like Brookings Institute. And one of the most powerful is the RAND Corporation. And really, the RAND Corporation is the brains behind the entire Cold War. One of the talks I did was Alex Abea's book, Soldiers of Reason, which is the official history of the RAND Corporation. And in that book, he says that if you have a problem with America or 21st century America, you have a problem with the RAND Corporation because they are the brains behind where we are in America now. So think tanks, NGOs, foundations, they do a lot of the work, the legwork, that maybe 50, 100 years ago would have been done by an intelligence agency or the military. So a lot of that has sort of switched over into being more of a private thing. And so you can get a lot more done under the cover of, oh, we're just here in your country to give you Pepsi and Coke, and we want to set up women's rights, and we want to set up free schools and micro loans, and all this stuff is just a cover for social engineering.
So let's do an example. Let's say someone at the top of the pyramid, he's like, I want the world to get vaccines. I want to implement it because he believes that this level of compliance will serve him in some way. So the guy at the top of the pyramid says, okay, this is what I want. How does that order begin to spread outwards? Where does it go from there? And then how does it happen that, say, I am going to the pharmacy and there's a big sign saying you must get the flu vaccine or you will be in danger? Do you have an idea of how that kind of comes down?
Well, I don't know if there's anybody you could think of, but maybe Gil Bates is somebody who comes to mind who says, we need to get those numbers down. We need to get Roosh is having too many children. And so if we use my little algorithm calculator here of how to poison all of his offspring, we can get those numbers down in the Roosh offspring.
Yeah, Gil Bates is a great example of somebody who is that kind of a figure, right? He is maybe not at the top of the pyramid, but he's definitely up there pretty high. Because he was kind of put into that position of being the face of Microsoft. His background, of course, is a family that was definitely involved in the deep state, the military-industrial complex side of things. A whole side that I didn't even mention was like the tech side, right? DARPA and this kind of stuff. That's a whole other side of the pyramid, which all connects into the same structures, the same committees, the same people. So basically, I think what happens is you could take somebody like Brzezinski. He's a great example, maybe better than Bill Gates because I know more about Brzezinski's life. So he was a expatriate during the Cold War. His family came over. They were noble Polish family. And then they left, I think, due to communism or something, to go to Canada. And so Brzezinski went to McGill University, which was a hub of MK Ultra at the time, ironically. And Brzezinski wrote a book which would catch the eye of other really powerful people. So he wrote Between Two Ages, which is a 1973 book on technocracy and where the West should go, where it needs to go, kind of a planning book. And it caught the eye of David Rockefeller, and he said, you know what, I'm going to set up an entire steering committee just for this guy to run. And so he called up Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger called up Brzezinski and said, we want you to come and run the Trilateral Commission. So you get Brzezinski being the head of this thing. And so then what Brzezinski can do is organize these trilateral meetings where the real, the most powerful banking, tech, elite, media people will come and sit in, and they'll organize meetings with other heads of state, and they'll say, we would like to do this. They'll banter around, have some debate. But that's kind of the way it gets implemented. It gets implemented by these really, really highly powerful people who set the policy, and then it kind of trickles down through the corporate sphere, like you were talking about, like at the local Walgreens. Well, that would be decisions made by the board of Walgreens and the shareholders. And there've actually been multiple studies that show that I think some outrageous percentage of like the Fortune 100 and maybe even the Fortune 500, it's controlled by a small number of people who own the controlling shares. So just by peer review research, it was a Swedish study from 10 years ago. You can look that up. So people have done TED Talks on it even. Just by looking at who owns controlling shares, there's already a very small number of people who could control a large portion of the global economy. And so that's how it happens, is that you have these yearly meetings where they propose these ideas, it gets debated a little bit, and then it kind of trickles down into what you're talking about, the local, pharmacy or whatever.
So let's just say that I want that kind of power. I want to be in the elite club. I want to be calling all the shots. How do I get in? Like, what do I have to do to get all the way up there to where I'm working for Bill Gates, and I can be in the position of Zbigniew Jaborinski or whatever, however you say his name. I want to be that top dog. How do we get in? Because we are smart guys, aren't we? I mean, is there anything we have to do to get in, just to be smart, just to want to control billions of people?
First thing you got to do is put your pee-pee in the poo-poo. That's the first thing you do, and then you're initiated. No, not really. Although that
may be kind of accurate.
That does occur in the Skull and Bones thing. I think they do have a kind of a quasi gay thing that they're involved in. It's Skull and Bones, but typically you would need to be at an Ivy League school. Maybe not always, but you're not going to be in it unless you're like the stock of Darius from ancient Persia. Like, I don't know what your bloodline
Which
is.
I'm not.
Okay. Well, Darius, right? Maybe you're related to Darius. I don't know. But the first thing is that some people have classed the power structure between the Bloods and the Brains. And so Bloods would be people who have a kind of a known lineage of some sort that's respected. So this would be, if you're obviously from a Rockefeller Rothschild family, you have a lot of advantages for being in the power structure. Not always. Sometimes people leave those families and aren't even brought into it because it's kind of like a mafia, like if you've watched mafia movies, like it's not the kind of lifestyle for everyone. But if you're not born into like a privileged elite, household or whatever, then most of the time it would be whether you're recruited from Ivy League universities. So most of the time, people from Harvard, people from those business schools, London School of Economics, Oxford, Cambridge, those have been the primary recruiting grounds for who will go on to be what are called the managerial class. So I would say that roughly speaking, in the last 100 years, you could speak of an inner party and then an outer party. So the inner party would be these really, really powerful, wealthy families and elites, 12, 13, 15, who knows? It doesn't really matter. And then outside in that outer ring would be the helpers, as they're called. And these are the people who are like the 6,000 academics. In fact, one of the elite, David Rothkopf, he wrote a book about the managerial class, the 6,000 people that run the world who work for these sort of eye of the higher level pyramid people. So to get in would require, most likely, you're at a university, you're at Harvard, you get approached by, hey, we want you to come work at our foundation. We think you're a bright kid. You could, really promote this, that. Maybe you go spend 10, 20 years working at different NGOs and think tanks, and then you move up, and then maybe, we'd like you to come work at the National Security Council. And so that's how it works, is kind of like climbing this global sphere. And that could be somebody who's a CEO. It could be any of these kinds of things. And it does help, I think, to have had, we were joking about Skull and Bones. I mean, that definitely helps to have that kind of fraternal connections. Maybe Freemasonry could be involved in this, or just Phi Beta Kappa, these different kinds of networks that connect you to these higher level people. But without the pedigree of a very wealthy, powerful family, or going up the ranks of Harvard or something like that, you're probably not going to be introduced into the actual power structure.
So I guess if you have to ask that question, you will not be let into that big club. Okay, so we kind of talked about how they have control, broad control over policy, agenda. The guy at the top of the pyramid, he makes the order from that he probably received from his experts, the models. Now they're using machine learning, AI, to this is how we should do it to maintain power. But how specific does it get concerning controlling the behavior of the individual? Like how micro do they get? When, okay, they want me to take a vaccine. Okay, that's once a year, let's say. But how much does it go day to day, where they want to control hour by hour the things I do, maybe even my own thoughts? Or does it stay mostly broad, just putting the sheep in this pen or herding them to that pen?
I would say that I'm sure that there are examples. I'm trying to run through what I'm aware of. I'm sure there are examples of studies that were done, research that was done on how to control people even in the phases of their daily life. If you look at institutes like the Tavistock Institute, they've done kind of pretty weird and out there studies like that about how to socially engineer man in all aspects of his life. And so it really is a matter of controlling and dominating the entire biosphere. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we were talking about this the other day with the AIDS thing. There was a release. It was a declassified document back under Rumsfeld where it was how to dominate the information sphere. So that's just one sphere where they wanted to have complete domination of the tech world in terms of information in the tech world and how it's perceived and how it comes out, how it's transmitted. Ultimately, I suspect the internet was all part of that. I don't really think the internet was given, for people to be free and this kind of stuff. I think ultimately it was part of that plan. But in that document, Rumsfeld kind of runs through a lot of ways that every aspect of information transmission could be engineered. Not saying that he achieved that, but that's the goal. The Air Force had a similar document a few years ago about the weather. Total weather control and awareness, right? Now, I'm not saying that they totally control the weather. I'm saying they'll put out these things about what the goals are. So when it comes to social engineering man, definitely man's daily life would be relevant, his daily existence, how he perceives himself, what he does throughout, how many times he's clicking the phone every day. Absolutely. I think the smartphone itself is probably the best example of what you're talking about, of how to socially engineer us to where our daily existence is not patterned around things that should be. And I fall into this. I'm implicating myself in this. Like, am I waking up to do my morning prayers or am I waking up to check my phone? You know what I mean? I think that's a great example. And in fact, I can show you, it's called a Schwitzgebel machine, which was a prison tracking device that they invented in the 70s to put on inmates so that they would self-police. The purpose of the Schwitzgebel machine was so that you didn't have as many guards you had to pay, because all the inmates had this anklet that just told them where they were through GPS or whatever, and radio tracking. It told them their heart rate so that if they were like running away, you could. So that's just a Fitbit. I mean, we all have a Schwitzgebel machine right here. So I couldn't think of a better example than that.
Do you think the controllers of the past could have imagined how easily and voluntarily citizens of the future would want to take on the smartphone, would want to put on the Fitbit, which does allow them more of this micromanagement level of control? Because we can say, oh, they convinced us to get the smartphone because they sold us its convenience. It makes things life easier. But at some point, when do we blame the human being for seeking out the easy way too? So, I mean, have we been as a people been digging our own graves, basically giving power to those who give us these electronic toys? Please control us, monitor us. And I think a good example is these smart speakers that people put in their homes, the Alexa, the Google Home, that it's pretty clear they record everything you say. Yet every Christmas I hear Amazon sold 6 Gorillion speakers. So people don't seem to care.
Roosh, do not say the word Gorillion. That word is forbidden. Roosh, you've been recorded saying the word Gorillion. Yeah. I think you're spot on. All of these things that are there's a great documentary that covers this called The Light Bulb Conspiracy. It's not actually a conspiracy documentary. It's just a documentary on planned obsolescence, that we think we live in a free market society where, oh, you just come up with the best product and you'll rise up the pyramid of free market whatever success. But it doesn't really work that way. There's a level to which that's allowed, and it goes on. But what that documentary shows is that there have been many, many cases where advancement and development in the market or in products or in inventions have been suppressed so that the market can stay as it is and stay stagnant, products stay as they are. Printers, there's actually cases where printers were actually had a chip in them so that they would malfunction after a year, so that you would have to buy another printer, these stupid Epson printers or whatever, right? HB printers that are like $300 and they break after a year. And people have found and sued these companies for placing these obsolescence chips in products. So once you kind of realize that level of stuff, you start to see that, wait, we don't actually live in this free market situation where it's just whoever has the best product. It's all gamed, it's all rigged, all of it. And yes, I think ultimately we share a bit of the blame. We can't pass everything off to, oh, well, I'm just oppressed by the elite, and so I'm excused from. No, we participate in acquiescing to this stuff, and I think that's the main reason we do that is there you go, planned obsolescence, exactly. I think Apple got sued too over the batteries, like because the batteries, you can't remove them, and they actually got sued over that. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that we share culpability for going along with this, but I think most of us feel like it's too big to even stop. Like, you can't. How do you stop this juggernaut?
So, can you describe to me what would be the elite's ideal citizen, their ideal person that they think, this is the state that I want the person to be in? What are some qualities, attributes that the ideal citizen has? And when you look around to the people in your city that you live in right now, do you see that, or do you think that the elites still have a ways to go to get to their ideal slave?
Well, since I still see citizens, the elite have a way to go because they want to get rid of those citizens and put them in a grave. So the fact that their hearts are still beating and they're still breathing, I think, is not everything's not where they want it to be. We know from pretty much every one of them. I can't think of a single person in the power structure above a certain level who doesn't believe in dysgenics, who doesn't believe in radical depop, who doesn't believe in all of the things that are part of that kind of cult that you have to accept. I think back to UNESCO's philosophy. Julian Huxley, who coined the transhumanism term, Aldous' brother, he wrote the philosophy of UNESCO, which is actually the same presentation that's in Brave New World. So if you read Brave New World and you see the alphas and the betas and the gammas and the deltas, the omegas, the ideal citizen is whatever's useful. Humans are just resources from that perspective to be farmed and used like cattle. And then when they're done, they're done. You don't need them anymore. So I think that the long term is to move into the tech, AI running everything, and the number of humans would then be needed would be very, very small. Basically, just people who can work on the existing tech and the elite. So I do think there is a real, what's sometimes called a breakaway civilization plan. We've seen, Bill Gates having actually seed vaults in the Arctic. He's got entire vaults full of seeds hidden away in the Arctic. Well, I mean, why would he do that? Well, because he is one of the people that, gets access, to this kind of like Noah's Ark plan. I mean, I know that may sound a little out there, a little crazy, but, in 20, 30, 40 years, that's the plan, is to have a heavily depopulated planet. The elite have their various ways to go off while whatever they have planned happens. So the ideal citizen will be whatever's conducive to that long-term goal. So in the meantime, it would be just the most pliant, the most worm-like social justice type people. They're very useful. They're omegas, right? If you read Brave New World, that's who the omegas are. Like they don't even have full brain functioning. They're more like just kind of slugs, basically. People in the background hear me laugh. They're laughing at slugs. But
do you have a lot of people there?
No.
Oh.
No, don't report me to Bill Gates, to Gil Bates.
And we're going to talk about him
party
too.
During Corona, we need to send the police over there.
But when I look out the window and I'm in a multi-ethnic area of the DC suburbs, Washington, DC, and I hear hip hop blaring, I smell the marijuana smoke. Men's pants are halfway down their butts to announce to the world that they're down for some activities that I don't do. When I look at that and the yelling and the screaming, I think the elites are pretty close. They're pretty close to creating the ideal slave. And it's not just the vibrant people that surround me, but even you go into Washington, D.C. proper, and I haven't been there a long time, but June is a bad month to go. Gay flags everywhere. Everyone is seemingly gay. Anyway, but it seems like they're pretty far along. So let's just assume, they're getting closer and closer. What is the world? So we talked about the ideal slave they want, but what is the ideal world they want? I mean, how many people is it? Is it like a Terminator thing with Skynet? Is it like the Georgia Guidestones, 500 million? Like what do they think is, okay, this is perfect. If the world has this quality or number of people, then we are done. We don't have to worry about uprisings ever.
Well, that's actually something that the higher level actuaries and plans and white papers debate, is precisely that. They'll put together different models of, if we do X, then everybody's seen that TED Talk, right? Where Gil Bates is up there doing his little algorithm, right? That kind of stuff is what goes on at a lot of these higher National Population Council meetings, Rockefeller Population Council meetings. They'll say, well, if we do X, Y, Z, we can get the economy down to this, which will reduce population here. They even have it to where if you certain areas could be industrialized to bring down population. So for example, one of the books I did was Miles Copeland's memoirs, where he talks about if you don't know, Stuart Copeland from the Police, this is that same family. Miles Copeland was a famous CIA operative, and he did operations in Egypt and then in Syria, and then he moved to Egypt. So he spent most of his time as a consultant, quote unquote, for Egypt, i.e. doing his CIA work. And what he says in the book is pretty amazing, because it's not like all this spy stuff. Oh, they're going to, spy on Soviets and this kind of stuff. What it was really about was trying to manipulate the Egyptian government into buying into the policies of these think tanks, the ideas of depopulation. So because Egypt had such a tendency to produce population, they decided that the best way to bring down Egypt's population was to modernize it, to industrialize it, and to bring in, you got it, pop culture. He says once we introduced Hollywood and Bond movies to Egypt, then they thought that that's what it was to live it up like an American, like somebody in the West, like somebody in Hollywood, James Bond, whatever. That's what it was to live a fulfilled lifestyle. And so by doing that, he said, we were able to achieve a tremendous reduction in the population, because for whatever reason, well, you and I know, but the more affluent the society, the less children that they have, right? That tends to bring the numbers down. So that kind of a thing that you mentioned is what they will debate and what they will try to figure out, like how can we get the population down to this number by 2030? Can we do this? What about this? So I don't have a perfect answer as to I don't know that they know exactly what the ideal number is. That's probably something that's debated, but some of them do actually put out, Dr. Eric Pianka, for example, a druid, open Luciferian druid. He thinks that all humans need to go, basically. Others, you mentioned Georgia Guidestones, 500 million. I mean, that's debated, but some of the highest levels, they'll think that it needs to be just extremely low, and then whoever's left of the elite can via life extension, extend their life or merge with technology.
Are you insinuating that American culture is like a virus itself that reduces birth rates, destroys nations and families?
Absolutely, yeah. This book right here, Game of Nations by Miles Copeland, his famous CIA memoirs, he recounts at the end of the book, he says, if you want to understand my plan and what my whole work was in Egypt, he has a recommended reading list at the back, and it's all Bertrand Russell, Rockefeller stuff. It's all it is. So he says that basically the techniques that we put into place were the techniques of the Council on Foreign Relations. That's the first thing he says to read. He says, just read the Council on Foreign Relations. He says, read the RAND Corporation, read Bertrand Russell, read all these guys that I read. And that's what I did, was just go read all these guys. He says, because he says the pop culture was key. It was one of the easiest things that we had as a weapon. Exactly. Like a virus, a mind virus you just put it into the pop culture and it just spreads and then it disrupts.
So what does that say about men like me and you? We were born in this. We were born in this grand experiment to basically sterilize people culturally, to go for the soft kill, if you will. And we're products of that. I mean, can you just say that we're damaged? We're damaged people.
Absolutely. Now, you probably have seen some of the talks that I did on MK Ultra and that kind of stuff. One of the overlooked aspects of MK Ultra that everybody thinks it was like, oh, just mind control and trying to figure out how to have keywords and the spy do this and that. All they were trying to do was figure out the best way through individual humans to expand that to the society as a whole. So to create traumatized, dissociated people in the mass mind you can extrapolate to the mass mind from the individuals. And so that's the whole purpose of all that. It wasn't individual people. I mean, if it was just about creating assassins, like you could just hire a hitman to go kill somebody. You don't need to mind control them, all this elaborate stuff so that they could. No, it was about what they would do on a mass scale. That's the real secret to MK Ultra, was just pop culture. Pop culture, I think, is just MK Ultra at large. And so, yes, I don't think there's any way to be born in America unless you grew up like as some kind of weird Amish person or something, not to be damaged.
So would you say that if we were able to overcome this toxic culture and see the truth that there is a lot of logos in us, a lot of perhaps grace? I mean, because we look at the people around us and not a lot of people can connect the dots. I'm not saying we're special or better or smarter, but I'm saying that somehow we were able to see through that lie, put the hip hop off, turn it off, and yell at the kids who put it on and say, no, this isn't what life should be about. Even though we were in some ways raised in the pig pen, we're coated in mud. Yeah, we realize that I don't want to be covered in mud. I want to be cleaner than that. So I'm going to get out of the pig pen.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I would describe it to God's grace. I mean, I have multiple times been pulled back into the pig pen, and then after a while, you kind of get chastised and you realize that how empty that is, because really the end result of all that stuff is just nihilism. I mean, you can only try to feed your passions and your desires for so long before you recall that it doesn't fulfill you. It's not satisfying. And you yearn for something more. You yearn for eternity, right? Because we're made for eternal life, not just for bodily existence in this life. So, yeah, in a way, I would say in God's providence, He absolutely has, enlightened people like myself or you to understand the inadequacy, the emptiness, the destructiveness, the toxic nature of American culture and this global culture that it's based on. I mean, it's expanding out of the notion of Americanism into something even weirder and worse with globalization, where you'll get like the trans-pollination of these different weird things. Like you'll get anime exported to America, America exported to other countries. The weird creepy fetish stuff is promoted, across the Fortune 100, Fortune 500. You're getting now India has Bollywood, its own version of Hollywood. So it just kind of grows like a petri dish into all of these its own weird manifestations. But at the same time, as that gets worse, it gets darker, people are more apt to wake up because the evil is just so obvious and in your face. So I guess there's a good side to that, in that the more evil uncloaks itself. I think one of the witches, what's her name? Is it Blavatsky or Alice Bailey? One of those New Age witches said something like the 20th century and the 21st century would be the century when all of the dark secrets are open, like the secret society type ideas, that sort of Luciferian occultic idea, would just come out in the open because they would feel like they had attained enough power that they didn't even have to hide anymore.
So who would you say? I've been the past couple weeks reading on Aldous Huxley. I was reading his analysis of his book, Brave New World, listening to some podcasts. I'm like, man, a lot of stuff this guy says is actually happening now. And the weird thing is he was so matter of fact about how he wants to control, how he's helping to, we shouldn't use a totalitarian because people are going to get tired of it. We should involve people's consent. It's going to be more of a psychological level of control. And
Yeah.
in your mind, who were the most instrumental thinkers, or who are kind of helping to usher in this evil that those at the top of the pyramid are implementing now?
That's a great question. You could go back, depending on how far you wanted to go back. I mean, you could go back to, the fall, I guess, with Satan being the father of all lies. I mean, he would be at the top of the pyramid. He's the eye of the pyramid, I guess you could say. But in more recent times, what I did in my lecture series was try to pick out the most important strategists, social engineers, thinkers, and so forth. And it kind of runs the gamut. It's not one ethnicity, it's multiple ethnicities. But certainly, I mean, if you go back further, people like Karl Marx would be involved in this. I mean, Marx was very important, but I see Marx as a tool of the banking power. He actually had a lot of monetary support, which kind of trips a lot of people up because they think, well, Marxism is against capitalism. So wouldn't he be opposed to big banking? And that's a common misunderstanding, because Marxism was actually funded by the wealthiest people you can imagine. And because it's a great tool for wrecking things, right? It's like a wrecking ball. And it has a bit of truth. And that's the danger for any kind of disinformation, is that a partial truth has a lot of power to dupe maybe more naive people. So could you include Karl Marx? Absolutely. Like, revolutionary thought, he's one of the key revolutionary thinkers. Marx is up there. He's important to understand, but not in the typical way most people think of Marxism, as like just a class warfare thing. It's class warfare because he's a tool of the banking elite, you see. But he had predecessors, of course, that come out of Masonry and secret societies for sure. But in the modern era, I would say, obviously, Marx has an important role to play. Freud has an important role to play for changing people's ideas of making sin something that's now biophysical and chemical and related to your biology, basically, and not something that's spiritual or related to God. So Marx, Freud, Darwin. Obviously, I've done a lot of critiques of Darwin. Those three would be like the key ideology guys that I think Satan used for the last few centuries to change the world. And then, you could look at more of the strategists who then implement the worldview on the basis of these bad guys and basically scientism. I would actually say there's a great book that talks about scientism coming out of Masonic lodges. There's a book called Freemasonry and the Birth of Modern Science by Robert Lomas. Now, Lomas himself is a Freemason, so he's actually defending, I'm not promoting Freemasonry at all, but he's defending that scientism is essentially from the Masonic lodge. So I'm not saying everything's Masons running everything. I'm not saying that, but they do fit into this power structure, this pyramid to a degree for sure. And then out of that Royal Society clique, you get a lot of these people like the Huxleys, like Bertrand Russell, like H.G. Wells, like Arthur Koestler, like and I mentioned Koestler because a lot of people say, well, but wasn't he a Marxist? Well, he was a Marxist who left, Hungarian Jewish Marxist who went and became honored and decorated by the British Empire. Well, no, wait a minute. I thought the British Empire was like, against the communists and the Marxists. Well, that's what I'm arguing is that there's a higher level to which those kind of even big geopolitical dialectics are transcended by evil, by the powerful elite. I did a long interview with a good friend of mine who is a Russia analyst, Mark Hackard, and he translated some old KGB diaries from Russian that hadn't been in English yet, and they were talking about how Lord Victor Rothschild was giving information to British intelligence and to the KGB, trying to play both groups during the Cold War. The famous spy, Robert Maxwell, who is the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein. Robert Maxwell did the exact same thing as Victor Rothschild in the Cold War. He would play the West and British intelligence at the same time as playing the KGB. So there's a higher levels of people that are even transcend those kind of like big Cold War dialectics. So anybody in those kinds of circles are people that you could look to as ways to understand how it really plays out. But the books I cover are people like Miles Copeland, Aldous Huxley, Jacques Attali is the Kissinger of France. He tweets every day about like all this, how we need technocracy because of COVID, right? I mean, he's just bolstering the case. The books I covered on the RAND Corporation, Turning Point by Fritjof Capra. He's another one of these eco thinkers. We have to think about the eco stuff as kind of the key. That's like their gospel almost, right? Because evolution and the eco environment, that's like their version of the gospel. And so everything is centered around the idea of the environment and ecology. After about the 60s, they made the decision at the Club of Rome to adopt the notion of the first global revolution, which is that in order to totally, as you called it, right, you said in your stream accurately that this is a revolution. The final revolution that Huxley and Bertrand Russell were talking about is this revolution of the post-human revolution, right? And so the key linchpin of this is the green climate stuff. And Aldous Huxley, or Julian Huxley, makes that clear in his philosophy of UNESCO. So I covered Kessler, Russell, Edward Bernays, H.G. Wells, Huxley. There's also T.H. Huxley, who's like the father of he's the first to promote the idea of survival of the fittest, right? But yeah, Tavistock Institute, and then, you can get into the power blocks, the U.S., U.K., Israel. That is the Anglo-American power block establishment.
Now, a guy like Bill Gates doesn't seem like a thinker to me. He seems like a bagman, a gopher. He just seems to be following instructions and has been given quite a bit of power and wealth to carry that out. Would you agree, or do you think he is one of the thinkers involved in ushering in this new stage or next stage of globalism?
I think he's one of the helpers. He's one of the high-level managerial class people. So people who are like CEOs at the Fortune 100 level. This like 6,000 managerial class people. Bill Gates is very high up in that structure, I would say. He's not the eye of the pyramid, but he's definitely running point guard for this whole plan for sure. Even if he's not at the tip top of the pyramid, I'm sure there's people higher than him, more powerful than him. The Rothschilds have had power. They've been a banking dynasty for centuries. We don't even know the level of wealth that they have. I mean, the Vatican itself, we can't forget the Vatican because even traditional Catholics like David Wimhoff have written entire books on how the Vatican was co-opted during the Cold War. If anybody's really interested in that story, I'll probably be covering this next, which is Time Life Magazine, John Courtney Murray, CIA, and their program of doctrinal warfare. This is a big key to understanding what happened to the Roman Catholic Church after Vatican II. I'm not exempting that there's problems in Orthodoxy. I know that there's problems in the Orthodox world too, but ironically, the problems of the Orthodox world is the same as the problems of the Roman Catholic world, which is these think tanks, these powerful institutions, these universities that are funded by the same power blocks and wealthy people. They are the ones that try to influence and use the churches. So we have the same problems for sure, but we can't exempt big international institutions like the Roman Catholic Church from being co-opted and being steered into this globalist plan. And I think everybody can see that that's obvious with Francis. Like, I don't think there's any question.
And I don't want to offend all the Catholics here, but yeah, their Pope is up to
I think most of them would agree that Francis
something
is
weird.
like promoting globalism.
Okay, so then I could ask you, for those at the top of the pyramid, it doesn't even have to be at the Bill Gates level, just the upper class managers. Why are they seeking this level of control over us? Why do they want to control us? Why are they implementing all these plans and these models? Why do they want this power? And what is it? It seems like an obsession. Maybe this is a human psychological answer, or could be something related to they're in communion with some of the dark side of the spiritual world. But why are they doing this to us? Why don't they just let us be free? Why don't they just let us do what we want to do?
That question is actually addressed many times in many of these writers, and what they say is that freedom, if we speak of political freedom here, that's not really a real thing. That's an ideology or a propaganda tool that's been used. It's not a real ideology that anyone can link themselves to, because just bare freedom doesn't even make any sense. Freedom to do things, freedom against the state, freedom of the state to imprison you. I mean, what does it mean to say freedom? And that's why in the history of political philosophy, it's usually characterized as positive liberty or negative liberty, right? If you're a libertarian, then you believe in negative liberty, which is the idea that, liberty is defined by limiting the state, right? But those are kind of simplistic historic notions. I'm just saying from the global elite perspective, that doesn't even register. That's not even a real thing. I mean, that's just a tool that's been used at different times in different ways to manipulate populations. It's a tool of statecraft or control. Machiavelli writes about this, for example. So something like freedom is viewed as a tool to steer people in different ways. So there's not really such a thing as freedom, because from the dominant worldview of the scientism elite or the materialist perspective or the evolutionary perspective, we're not really free. We're just kind of part of the natural process. So what Salk or Bertrand Russell or the scientific priest class will argue is that you're really only at the top of the totem pole if you've evolved, quote unquote, to realize that evolution is true, and that whoever has the highest IQ should really be running things, right? And if you have figured that out, then maybe you're worthy to be part of the priest class. And I'm not joking. They quite literally describe it like the scientific priest class will steer evolution. They will steer the development of mankind. And that's the rationale that they used. Salk argues this in his book, Survival of the Wisest. He says, we have to step up to the plate to be the driving. We steer evolution. And yes, sometimes that's going to include poisoning mass groups of people. Because if we can put environmental pressures on the species in their mindset, that will provoke jumps in evolution, you see. So it's a very weird, dark, inverted idea that all of what we're doing is justified because of science and because the ends justify the means, because we're just trying to speed up evolution. But ironically, there's a weird quote in one of the H.G. Wells books. It's either at the end of Open Conspiracy or New World Order, where he says, look, there's religion's dead. There's nothing else to live for. He says, so we'll give you something noble to die for, which is the future of the elite, and you can nobly die for us because you're not going to go into the future. He's very open about this, very candid. He's like, it's not for you, but when we have Star Trek utopia in the future, he says, you will have died nobly for us. Thank you, by the way. He says that. It's crazy.
Now, I remember when we first met, this was late last year, Halloween. We were in Orlando, Florida. And on this day, we didn't dress up in costumes, but a lot of other people did. Most of the women, they would take some kind of costume and add the word sexy to it. So sexy nurse, sexy doctor, anything, And I think we didn't participate in that. We didn't go drinking and picking up girls. We sat down at a courtyard and
I
talking a
was a
lot.
sexy skank. I don't know if you missed it. I had my sexy skank costume on.
You know,
But
and there was some costumes that were just sexy. That's it. There was no costume. She
sexy
was
sex.
just a sexy girl. Anyway, so we were sitting in a courtyard and watching this walk on by and talking about a lot of the topics here. And, I definitely wanted to get your answers for everyone instead of only me, like it was on that day. And we were talking a lot about psyops. Now, this word gets thrown out a lot. Everyone calls this is a psyop and that is a psyop. And, we can argue that this Halloween parade of sexy individuals, mostly women, who were basically turning that night on Halloween into an open air brothel. We can maybe even argue that was a psyop too. So I wanted to ask you, what is a psyop?
Well, this comes out of wartime planning and strategy, and the oldest example of this people are most familiar with would probably be, Sun Tzu, Art of War. He speaks of the principles behind psychological warfare, which is the idea that the easiest way to win a war is to defeat the opponent not on the battlefield but in his mind. So if you can demoralize and basically make him lose his spirit, his morale, then you've already won. You don't have to expend all your soldiers and his soldiers if you can just get him over on your side. So hence it starts to move over into the domain of persuasion and propaganda. So one of the works that I covered historically, other than Sun Tzu's, is a lot of people don't know that Machiavelli, of Prince fame, he also wrote a famous book called Art of War. I think it's one of the oldest. It's in the modern era. It's one of the earliest treatises on warfare of the West. Pretty famous book, but he has a really amazing chapter in there, book 6, which is about psyops. It's about what you're talking about. It's about tricks, basically just conning people using tricks. And after the war, the World War II, most of the people who were involved in psychological warfare, Sarnoff, Paley, Lipman, these different people who went on to do consulting and ad agencies, and they also did work in terms of the original network television channels. CBS, ABC, and those are all started by people from the OSS. So literally, television and its birth with the networks is all OSS, intelligence, psychological warfare people. It's pretty crazy when you read about this, and Bernays even touches on this in his famous book. So psychological warfare is just simply convincing the enemy of your position. It's tricking people, it's conning people, and it could be all kinds of different things. It could be a really elaborate operation that involves multiple phases of propaganda. If we think of a great example, remember, if you think about before a war, sometimes you'll see like, oh, look at this dusty boy laying upon the grass here in this war-torn area, and the evil whoever's who caused this hate children, this kind of a thing. Like this is a real basic example. Or the Bush PR firm back at the time of Desert Storm, who put out the woman crying and saying that Saddam throws babies out of incubators, right? All made up. It's just an invention. Those are great key examples of psyops, right? Just psychological tricks that are used to manipulate most of the time it's emotions. It's kind of playing on people's emotion, pulling their heartstrings to get them to be for or against a war. Those are the easiest, simplest examples of psyops. But with the complexity of where we are now in the modern world, it's not so much about, sometimes it's about getting people to sign on to wars like we saw with the war in Syria when they were using Dusty Boy and all these kinds of things like this. Now it's a little more sophisticated to where it's like almost every area of life involves some version of this, because the internet, advertising, pop culture, it's all using the same principles of psyops, and it's everywhere. It's in our face constantly. So yeah, I think you could say you can't even understand where we are now without understanding psyops.
Is there a psyop that brings me closer to family and brings me closer to God? A psyop that's pushed from those at the top. I look at the psyop, I'm like, man, I want to make love to a woman, to marry her, make love to her, have a beautiful family, raise a garden? Has there been a psyop in the recent times anyway that brings people closer to family, or does it seem to be of the Halloween type where women have to show their bits everywhere in public, on the internet, in person? I have to stare at her butt, yoga pants. Suddenly yoga pants is popular, and soon no pants. And for the perverts in the chat, I'm like, oh yeah, that's great, but they're falling for it, are they not? Their lust is being put on the women. No, they have no plan for having a family. They just want all the women in the world. I mean, who would fall for such a trick such as that, right?
Yeah, that's yeah. There are examples. So a great example of this is Bernays. Okay, so in his book on propaganda, he talks about how all of these advertising campaigns were really just kind of scams and tricks to see what would work. And so you probably heard the one of the cigarettes, the freedom torches, and how do we get women smoking? Because here's a whole, like section of the population that's not buying cigarettes. Well, let's tie it to some idea that, in their mind is representing their freedom. And so if you believe in, women's suffrage, if you believe in feminism, and then you smoke a cigarette like whatever Hollywood person on the ad or whatever, and it worked tremendously. So in the 20s, 30s, 40s, they were really studying this stuff hardcore and figuring out in a scientific way how to, with precision, get people to adopt trends, get them to adopt fads. And then the next several decades up till now of pop culture is nothing but the implementation of different trends. And I'm not saying every single trend is from the top down. I mean, obviously some things occur organically, but a lot of times they get co-opted. There's actually a good rom-com of all things that makes this point. It came out in about 2002. It's called Josie and the Pussycats. It's a goofy comedy movie. But the plot of the movie is about, believe it or not, is about the shadow government, the deep state, military industrial complex, the corporate elite studying trends to steer them. As the whole movie is worth watching just for that point. But yeah, so there's no question when you read people like Bernays that that's what it is. And I think, have there been good psyops? Oddly enough, kind of yes, because the origin of the term propaganda, it actually goes back to the Holy Office of Propaganda. If you're familiar with Catholic history, I'm not knocking the Catholic Church for this. I mean, I think that anybody who does apologetics does a version of propaganda, right? The Holy Office of Propaganda was kind of like the Vatican's office of doing apologetics and rebuking and going against heresy, and it has a lot of evil connotations now because we think of the Holy Office, the Inquisition, but a lot of that's actually exaggerated and made up. The stories about the Inquisition are false, a lot of them. And what was a lot of times going on was just trying to defend the faith and defend the church and defend, even though I don't agree with the papal view, the idea of propaganda itself is not inherently evil. And again, anybody who does apologetics is kind of doing a positive version of propaganda. But in the modern world, there's not a whole lot of positive propaganda. I mean, there's some wholesome stuff out there, but not a whole lot.
What would you say is maybe the top psyop going on right now outside of the coronavirus pandemic, which we're going to get to that? But is there a psyop that's like, man, they're really pushing this hard, or this has really come out of nowhere? It has escalated, please.
Veganism, and it's not the one I would have expected. Now, one of the global elite,
I will not eat bugs.
Right. So Toffler, Alvin Toffler, a famous globalist he wrote a lot in the 70s and 80s about where we would be now. He's kind of like another Brzezinski type of character, Alvin Toffler. So he wrote Future Shock and Third Wave and these kinds of books talking about where we are now. He said in the 70s that they would promote veganism and anarcho-libertarian types of movements. Now, I'm not saying everybody who's into anarcho-libertarianism is bad, or I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that they had the idea back in the 70s, and there's actually Tavistock documents too that talk about using new communities, like hippie type commune, vegan communities, vegetarian movements, for social engineering tests and experimentation. I can show you that if you read Daniel Eslin's book on Tavistock Institute, I think it's in Third Wave from Toffler. But so they had the idea, why don't we just experiment with this? Because because one of the key ways, according to the global elite, to control populations is through diet. This is missed by a lot of people, but if you've read, elite writers, even in Art of War, he says one way you could win against the enemy population is to poison their water, right? Pour something down the well, throw some dead rats down the well or something like this, right? So one of the elite that we can't forget, who's obviously tied into the Darwin family, is Charles Galton Darwin, who wrote the book The Next Million Years. And what does he talk about in an entire chapter? Controlling the mass population's diet. He has an entire section on this. It's a great book. I did a whole talk. It's not great in a good way. It's revelatory. But he wrote this in the 1950s, 1952. So he's like a Bill Gates of his day kind of character. And he says you have to control diet. So I think it was 2019 or the beginning of 2020, I forget. All the global elite publications like The Economist and Forbes, it's time. This is the vegan. 2020 is the year of veganism, and Jay-Z and Beyonce are going to give free concerts to promote veganism, and all of these Hollywood stars are suddenly vegan. Now the Queen of England is promoting veganism. All this is social engineering, and actually it does tie into COVID because they're actually saying that if we'd had a vegan diet, we wouldn't have COVID. They're saying this now, which is total nonsense. But that is the biggest psyop that they had planned for a long time that's coming out now. That and what we're seeing with the death of Hollywood, interestingly, moving into everything being streaming. Atali talked about that, like the movement away from movies, old Hollywood, and into everything being live streaming. These are two big things that they had planned for a long time.
Are we participating in one of their psyops?
I don't think that you can't have a legalistic view of because I mean, even if you use the dollar bill, right, you're participating in a usurious money-based system. So there's biblical examples of people like Prophet Daniel, who lived in Babylon, and he had to a degree had to participate in that system while not compromising his faith. Right, Daniel wouldn't bow to the image of Nebuchadnezzar, the golden idol, but he was still able to live in the midst of Babylon, even attained a high position of power. So that there's always the possibility of existing within Babylon as Christians, but you're right that we have to be careful not to fall into being mind controlled by this kind of stuff, for sure.
Now, if I was a female and I was playing a video game and live streaming that while showing my boobs, I would say we are participating in the psyop. But I think with our level of discussion, we are not. So a few weeks ago, I called you on the phone because I was trying to connect the dots to perhaps the biggest psyop that's going on right now, the coronavirus pandemic. And it was too many moving parts, and I didn't have the rich background and the knowledge of what the elites are up to like you did. So I called you and you were patient with me. We talked for a long time. And after that, I came out with the stream that coronavirus is a revolution. I mean, this is a rapid change of behavior that they are pushing on to us to usher us into the next stage of globalism that aims to cement their power. Would you say I was on the right track? And what do you think about what is going on there?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I had done a few streams where so when I first heard about this back in maybe January, February, I did a 20-minute video where I said, I think a lot of this is exaggerated. But even for a time like you, it was so promoted, I started thinking maybe this is a real pandemic, right? Like maybe there's really, I don't know. But so I kind of held off on exactly to wait to see, because if you do this long enough, you'll eventually make mistakes and you'll, get ahead of yourself and then realize, actually, I didn't get that part right. So I waited to see where it was going. And what became evident was that it's way more so about everybody's reaction to this thing than it is the thing itself. It's not even so much about XYZ amount of people died or passed away. It's more so about what is this achieving. That became really evident. And as you pointed out, there have been many past instances where we could see analogies. I think the AIDS analogy that you made was a great analogy, because as we were talking about, I remember being in high school and that I would hear these ridiculous figures, like they would say, by the time you graduate high school, right, 1997, 98, 1/4 of Nashville will be infected with AIDS, and I'm like, 1/4. So I literally won't be able to date like like 1 in 4 girls by the time I'm a senior in high school. Like I can't date them because they're going to give me the AIDS, right? Just loot. But even then, I was like, that sounds like BS to me. And then you would hear these other, kind of crazy AIDS things come out, and then just by happenstance in research one day when I was reading, I think I sent you that article at Global Research, that declassified Rumsfeld document about PSYOPs. Amazingly, like towards the end of the document, he's like, yeah, we can learn how to be successful in PSYOPs through the actions that were done through Don't Do Drugs, like DARE program, and the AIDS awareness programs. Like those were key PSYOP examples of PSYOPs. And I think you on your stream, like you showed, these old Life magazines or Time magazine, whatever it was, of how we're all going to have AIDS. It's exactly the same. Other examples, remember ozone? The hole in the ozone was going to, if we keep farting and if we keep using aerosol spray cans, the ozone layer is going to cook everybody in the next 10, 15, and they just keep extending it 20 years. And nobody even talks about the ozone. Like the hole in the ozone was like the biggest thing in the late 80s, and it's not even talked about anymore. So you start to see these like things that were supposed to be, according to the mainstream media, the end of the world, the apocalypse, the crisis. And then suddenly 5-10 years later, they're gone. I remember there was a British article, I have it saved somewhere, from 2003. It's either the Telegraph or the Guardian or one of these. And it says by 2015, there will no longer be snow. Like there will be children in the world who've grown up and they've never seen snow because the world will be so heated from global warming that nobody will know what snow is anymore. Literally, just utterly absurd mainstream media predictions. And then you go back and you look at like Paul Ehrlich, one of the big global climate guru people who said everybody needs to die. I found old articles of Paul Ehrlich when I was working as a research assistant, where in the late 70s, he said that we would have ice age. Like we're going to be frozen. We're all going to be, walking around like Han and Luke on Hoth, and we're going to have to be cutting open, woolly mammoths to survive because there's going to be a global ice age by the year 2010. So anyway, long story short, all that BS, they just recycle it. They do the same thing over and over and over. And this is just a perfect, but it's like, this one is huge. I mean, I think it's like 911, the 911 event in slow motion on a global scale. It's crazy.
And have you been surprised, or has it been expected, how quickly they were able to usher in this new medical gulag? How people, I'm sure you go outside the store, everyone's wearing the mask. I mean, they are complying. It's happened to me. I went for a walk before I did the stream, and I'm at the park. And then I'm on a path that's very wide, but then people are scared to get close to me. I mean, and I saw a guy, he put on his mask right as he was going to cross by me. I mean, just silly stuff. And I feel so bad for these people that they're not just scared of the virus, but they're scared of not being in a state of compliance because, most Americans are groomed to comply ever since they were young. So what do you think of, is this something you expected, how quickly they could get people in line?
No, but I mean, I should have been willing to accept this because I remember living through the 9 event. And how quickly that mobilized everybody to do whatever W said with the mustard gas just shot him, right? I mean, everybody just immediately after the 9 event was like, oh, we got to go get them, right? Just get anybody. And then it was like we're going after people who have no connection to the 9 event. So if I'd have remembered the 9 event, I would have been, I should have noticed that, yes, it is that easy to immediately corral people into some nonsense. But Yet at the same time, it did surprise me. So I mean, I didn't know that all this COVID stuff was coming. I did do an essay back in 2011 when Contagion came out, because I was reviewing movies pretty consistently back then as well, and I knew that Contagion was a big bunch of propaganda. I mean, and it was like portraying the conspiracy person, as a lunatic who's just trying to game the market and make money off of conspiracy stuff. And then it had the CDC people, and it had even the term social distancing and all this stuff. So I wrote a long essay back at the time on that movie in 2011, and I speculated that there's a good chance they could use some kind of like, pandemic type scare. But obviously, I didn't know for sure what would be used. But once this stuff started happening and it went global after the China outbreak, supposedly, then I started realizing, the people who talked about the medical tyranny, bringing this in, that was the key that many people had missed, because Fritjof Capra, the Dr. Day tapes, if you've not heard those, everybody should listen to the Dr. Day lectures. Rockefeller talks about it. And there's one more that I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but they pretty consistently talk about how the key linchpin to bringing in this stuff would be medicine. Salk. Oh, yeah, Dr. Salk, obviously. If you read the book by Nancy Banks, AIDS, Opium, and Empire, she details the whole history of the Rockefellers and their involvement in American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, Planned Parenthood. All of those things are essentially Rockefeller-funded entities. And they figured out that medicine would be a key way to slip a lot of this stuff in. I mean, climate is part of that too, obviously, with because your health is dependent on the environment, you see. So, but
didn't you hear that all the animals are coming out now because humans are not bothering them?
Right. Exactly. Which is also all the vegan activists. And by the way, there's this new cult, Extinction Rebellion. Have you heard of this vegan cult?
Yeah, that's not funded by anyone. It's totally spontaneous.
It just happened. But it's openly funded by the billionaires. We did a whole stream, Tristan and I, covering that. But yeah, so suddenly these cults pop up, these activists pop up with all this money. Saudi billionaires, Prince Al-Walid, he funds a lot of these giant vegan movements, billions of dollars going into all this stuff. It's once you realize the medical angle of it, it's like, whoa. Have you heard the Dr. Day tapes by chance?
No.
I think you have. I think I messaged you one time about those.
Dr. Date?
No, Day. They're called the Dr. Day.
Oh, Dr.
tape.
Day. Yes.
Yeah. And so he actually talked about the medical angle of all this a long time ago.
Okay, so you see how they seem to, there is some resistance, pockets of resistance, the Operation Gridlock. People want to reopen the country because they see the really horrible economic damage. And I'm not talking about the GDP, I'm talking individuals, the livelihoods of people that they're not getting back. But it seems to be their plan is going forward. Bill Gates is basically getting everything that he wants because his man Anthony Fauci is poisoning Trump's ear or something. I don't know. But based on where we are now and what you see, what is the United States going to be like in 5 years in response to this? What kind of country is it going to be if they continue getting their way in 5 years? Like we go into a time machine right now, we wake up in 5 years. What will you see?
That's really hard to say because it's kind of going to depend on the way that we react in the next year. As this goes by, it looks to me like it was a big gambit that they gambled to destroy the economy. I think that the main purpose behind a lot of this was to wreck the existing economy, solidify a lot of businesses then benefit from this. I was just reading an article yesterday about how many like $280 billion had been made by billionaires in this crisis. So it was a consolidation. It's a way to get rid of a lot of medium level corporations and companies in competition, mom and pops. Now everybody is going to have to go to box stores. It's all subsidized by bailouts and all this stuff. So we could see a big consolidation if they're successful in getting people to buy into the fear and they extend these lockdowns. I mean, there's a very real chance that they could crash the economy. I think that's what they're trying to do, and that's what they're trying to stoke, the fear, the panic. Even the mainstream media is saying that if the food lines cease, we could have food pandemics in the next year or two. I mean, if there's, yeah, I think that that's very real. If they extend this for a year and a half, 2 years, which is crazy, but that would, it seems like, lead to the breakdown of the food chain. And as I thought about this more and more, I was thinking, well, have there been previous examples of entities or people or groups who attacked food chains? Yes, in fact, I remembered Stalin was involved in doing this through starving Ukrainians, if I recall. And then also, I'm not positive, but I feel like, because I'm getting older, sometimes I don't remember everything, but it seems like Lenin did something like this too. I think Lenin stopped food chains and he caused kind of like, famine, and then blamed it on, the czar or the royal family or whoever, the whites, the white army or whatever. So that this is a tactic that people have used where they try to disrupt the food chain and then they blame it on their political opponents. They're obviously going to do that with Trump. They want to a degree. I'm not saying Trump's like a hero, or there's a power faction at that level that's going on battle wise between the faction of Trump and people like that, like you pointed out with governors. So I think they want to make the economy look really bad, and then for the election that would help damage Trump perhaps. But I think it's more than just like, it's not just a GOP Democrat political thing. I think it's ultimately, like you said, it's a revolution. It's an attempt to bring it in. And what you and I were kind of waiting to see is this a beta test phase for a final thing, or is this where they're going to throw it all down? And if they keep trying to extend the lockdown, I think that's to try to sink the economy as it is. And remember, the people who believe this stuff, they're revolutionaries. They may not be like classical Marxist revolutionaries, but they're revolutionaries in a weirder, satanic, technocratic sense, to where they don't have a problem destroying the existing economy because they print the money. They don't need the money. They want to move into a new phase of a post-human world.
One thing people have to be a little bit watchful for is when they start to open up again. There's already talk that this state they have a reopening plan. I expect if they're going all in, what they're going to do, they're going to open for a couple weeks. Then they say, oh no, hotspots are coming. People are getting sick in the virus. Then they're going to close things back down again. And this causes so much psychological pain because you thought it was over and now you're back. That is going to crush a lot of people. So that leads me to ask you, do you believe, in a 5-year timeline with the food shortages, with the mental breakdowns, there are already some leakage of stories that people are killing themselves. I saw one in Maryland, how a tenant bludgeoned his landlord nearly to death and things like that. Do you think there's a culling component to this where they want a percentage of us to just die? Due to this specifically, due to the coronavirus?
Not so much. I mean, and I had a friend who killed himself a few days ago, actually, as a result of all this. Some of the audience may recall Chris from the podcast that I used to do. It's public, so I'm not saying people know who he is, and people know that he kind of had some issues. But all this nonsense was, he decided to end things, sadly. So I think that does happen to some people in these kinds of situations where it's kind of a final straw. I don't think that that's really that effective of a way to depopulate. I mean, I think that there's much more effective means for that. I think the toxic culture, the porn or the prawn on the internet, all of that kind of stuff, trying to get people not to have families, that's all way more effective than something like Karanka. But it's entirely possible that down the road, if the elite did say retreat to some island or underground bunkers or whatever they have, which many of them do have those things, those are real, There could be a real release of something that is entirely possible. That is in the cards, I would say. But I don't think that this present event is anything like what they would do if they really wanted to engage in Depop.
I'm sorry to hear about your friend. May he rest in peace. One thing we saw Stalin, just to add a data point, Stalin, he did this mass starvation in Ukraine. Millions of Ukrainians died. That's something we probably won't see. But then when you hear quotes from Zbigniew Brzezinski saying it's easier to kill 1 million people than to control them, I hope you're right. But something tells me that they're going to test it a little bit, see how many can just starve. I don't think it's going to be the big cull yet, but I think it could. They're going to test out future culls. But what do you think about that?
The mindset of the people who are running things have no problem with doing any of those things. That's what we do have to keep that in mind. In fact, in Bertrand Russell's book, Scientific Outlook, he actually comments on that he thinks it's great that the Bolsheviks and Stalin did what they did. He said, now we're supposed to believe that Bertrand Russell, a Democrat who believed in the people and he hated the idea of tyranny. That's all BS. That's just because he is very explicit in the book that he thinks that the experiment, he says, of the Soviets and the Bolsheviks, he says, was a wonderful one. And he says, I have nothing but great hope and promise for what Stalin is trying to do, what the Bolsheviks did, what Lenin did. He calls Lenin great man. David Rockefeller says the same thing about Mao. Mao was the image of like a society should be run. He calls Maoism like the goal in his famous editorial in the New York Times from a China Traveler. Everybody should look that up if you haven't read that from David Rockefeller, because you see the monopoly capitalist loves the Maoist socialist, control system. He's very open, very candid about it. In fact, in China, in communist China, it was Chase Bank was the first bank that was set up. David Rockefeller has a whole chapter in his memoirs on that, how he went to communist China to set up the Chase Bank there. Because if you're in a control structure and you can be buddies with the party controller, well, you're going to get to have the only bank there, right? You said it's very useful for consolidating. And so what I'm getting at is that the same people who would engage in those kinds of maneuvers in those other countries, it's the same attitude here. They don't have any problem with if there was some sort of famine or could be reduced to some kind of scenario where we have to grow gardens or, that's entirely possible. I don't go into that. Many of the Orthodox saints have said and warned that Russia would eventually they did predict that.
So that kind of eases into the next topic I wanted to talk about, and what kind of surprises me. Okay, your face in the dual screen is not there. Let me get it back. There it is. Okay. Where'd you go, Jay? There we go.
I was raptured.
So one thing I'm kind of shocked about is how quickly the Christian churches have closed. I mean, Lenin would have been impressed how without any real protest, a lot of the churches closed. Sorry. Okay, let me get your head back small again. It's hard to fix your head and talk about churches at the same. There we go. Okay. So, Lenin would have been impressed how from a virus, millions of Christians in the United States seem mostly okay. Yeah, we don't want to go to church and get sick. And they've been closed. But they tell us to receive the sacraments from the YouTube, to watch the YouTube live. You're going to smell the incense from your liturgy from your computer speakers. So, and it seems like no one's protesting. Of course, the media is not going to say much about that. They're more concerned about the bars and clubs being shut down. But it's like, wow, in one fell swoop, all of the churches are closed. I mean, not only the Protestants, but the Catholics, the Orthodox. I don't know if your church, but in the Armenian church, which I'm in, the official diocese instruction is to conduct the service, but behind locked doors. So, what is your thoughts on that? Is this whole pandemic response a kind of low-key effort to get the Christians, or is just the Christians being lumped into the plan and they're no real threat to those who are in power?
Could have been a test to see, right? I think one angle on this, if everybody remembers that goofy thing, Jade Helm, this is one that I keep referencing in relation to Karanka, because Jade Helm was a bunch of nothing. But what I think the main purpose of Jade Helm was to test and see how people would react to large-scale fear, continuity of government type things. Like, what if we had a big collapse? What if there was this? What if there was that? How is everybody going to react? And I think that the military intentionally had Jade Helm leaked so that people would freak out and get scared. If you remember that a couple of years ago, everybody was talking about it. All the alternative media people were talking about Jade Helm, Jade Helm, Jade Helm. All I think that was just a test to see how people would react in those kind of scenarios. And then through all the metadata, they could see like what people did. And I think that could be going on here to see how people react. If you watch the event 2.0 ONE, then you know that they were doing this kind of stuff of seeing people's reactions to controlling the flow of information and the result of these events. So it could be that they want to see, well, what is the religious realm's reaction to this? Will they immediately cuck? It looks like they pretty much will. I think that the Greek bishops that have been arrested and stood up to this kind of stuff are heroic for those actions, because I mean, I do understand. I did a stream with a deacon who's a friend of mine, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. So he was trying to give like a middle position of like, well, the bishops also have to deal with lawsuits, because even though whatever your position on Karanka, if somebody did get sick, let's say somebody in the congregation got pneumonia, they could say Karanka, then sue and destroy the whole church. And so they had to make a decision between, but I mean, saying a local church, right? Bankrupt that whole local church. So some of the churches in like Rokor, the Russian Orthodox Church, have done a thing where it's like 5 to 10 parishioners at a time. So they're trying to find mediating positions. I don't really honestly know what the solution is to the problem, because I can see how, on the one hand, at its most basic level, it's like fear to like, are you really afraid of this goofy thing that is like, what, 1% death rate? I mean, it's not even if it's real as we're told, you know what I mean? So yes. I don't really have the answer to how what the churches should and shouldn't do, because ultimately I think that the strength of the argument is on the side of that you shouldn't shut them down. And if we look at previous pandemics, what was the precedent? I don't think churches were shut down in previous pandemics, and those were real, right? Like in the real pandemics.
So one thing that I wanted to ask you when I fix this, there we go, is what do you think, what is the elite view on God? Because it seems like by hiring witches like Marina Abramovich to do her, spirit cooking, which is trying to harness demons. So they do believe, a lot of those people do believe in the spiritual world. Now, if Satan exists, and I think they believe that also God must exist too. But as Sammy Davis Jr. said, that Satan has more power than God. So they really think that. But what is, in your opinion, based on what you've read, what is their view on God? Why do they spite him? Why do they worship the demons?
I think some of the elite do believe in the occult. Some of them do believe that there's a power there that can be tapped into and harnessed. Some of them don't. I think some of them, I've not found any evidence that, like David Rockefeller, I don't know that he was into the occult. He could have been, but to me, for all intents and purposes, he just looks like a pragmatist atheist. I think from Satan's perspective, it doesn't matter whether you acknowledge his existence or whether you're a pragmatic atheist. You're still under his, under his power by default. But yes, some of the elite do seem to be serious about their occultism. They do practice these things in varying degrees. They take it seriously. Some seem to have a more darker bent towards animism, voodoo, those kinds of practices. Crowley, for example, would advocate those kinds of things. He advocated sacrifice and even eating organs at times if you needed to. This kind of pretty crazy stuff. Michael Aquino, people are probably familiar with him. That he's a pretty serious Satanist and military colonel. So there are people who take it seriously. Is Bill Gates a Satanist? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, but he could also just as easily be, an atheist who thinks that, it just is what it is, and we can merge with computers and become gods or something. I mean, that's a Luciferian philosophy, whether one admits the existence of an angel called Satan or Lucifer anyway. But I think deep down, you're correct. Most people, even wicked people, know deep down that they're rebelling against God. That's what Romans 1 says.
And how do they view us? How do they view a Christian? I mean, do they see us as a true enemy or just a nuisance in the way of their plan? Is their plan to destroy the Christian people, to destroy the faith? What have you encountered?
Yeah, I would say Psalm 2, right? I mean, the nations rage against the Messiah. They counsel, they conspire against Christ, against his church, against his kingdom. Matthew 16, right? Jesus says that the gates of hell do war against the church, and most of the church fathers say that the gates of hell is the mouths of heretics, right? So there is a historic war against the church, against Christ's church. Ultimately, it goes even back to the beginning, to the garden, as Augustine says in City of God. The church is the city of God, which is God's people throughout all time, Old and New Testament, right, into the eschaton. So that's the real spiritual battle going on. But in the human domain, not every power structure person sees the church as something to be destroyed. In fact, many of them, people like Brzezinski and other people, they've said the church is a thing to co-opt and to steer for our purposes rather than just destroying it. Some of the more radical groups in history, like Robespierre, the French Revolutionary guys, Voltaire, they've seen the church as something that must be destroyed. But I think what's more dangerous and more insidious is the people who don't want to destroy it, but they want to just kind of tweak it and change it and move it into being this kind of one world religion thing.
And so how would you describe your own faith? Because you talk about it a lot in your channel. I've started to talk about mine too. For people who don't know, what church are you currently in?
So I attend a Russian Orthodox church, mostly. Sometimes I attend an Antiochian or Serbian. But my home church, I would affirm and agree with the Russian Orthodox Church.
And how has your faith played a role in light of the knowledge that you have? And I think you talked about it way early on. But so you have your faith, you're developing it in the Orthodox Church, and you know all this evil that's going on. So what kind of relationship does that have?
Ironically, sometimes the evil serves to confirm and strengthen the faith. I mean, I was raised Protestant. I had many years where I was in the world of Catholicism and kind of tried to figure out whether I was trad Catholic, and I went into that world for a while, and then eventually kind of got just fed up with the world of Roman Catholicism. Then I got into Orthodoxy around 2007-8, but I didn't fully commit to it. I kind of would go, and then I don't know. So for me, it was like a 10-year catechumenate before I finally was received into the church a couple of years ago. But yeah, knowing all of this stuff in a roundabout way is kind of what like kept bringing me back, because I would have periods where I would be really into going to mass and going to church, and then I would just get really fed up with the papacy and Vatican II, and then I would like, I'm just burnt out on this, and I don't care anymore. I'm done with it. But I would always kind of like drift back into it. Like, I think it was just God's providence. It's like, if you don't read scripture for a couple years, like eventually something will happen in my case, and you'll just be like, it's been a long time since I read the Psalms. Maybe I should pick the Psalms back up. And then you'll start reading again. And then
You don't have a Psalter? You don't read a Psalm every night?
no, I'm saying like years ago.
Oh, okay. I was only joking. So I guess you kind of hinted to it, but why not Catholicism, trad mass? Why not Protestantism, a biblical based Protestant church? Why Orthodoxy?
Well, I was raised Baptist. I got into hardcore Protestant Puritan Reformed theology when I was 19, 20, 21. I went to Protestant seminary for almost a year. And I had a really in-depth class there, which was on ancient and medieval church history. So part of the reading requirements were about 4 or 5 books from the church fathers and on church history. And just on my own, I got the church fathers set, which you see here behind me. And I just started plowing through the church fathers because if you're committed to Protestantism, one of the key doctrines is sola scripturis. Scripture alone is the foundation stone that you're going to, build your theology on. And so I got curious about how the biblical canon was put together and the notion of tradition and this kind of stuff. And the more that I dove into the church fathers, I started realizing that tradition is inseparable from how the canon came to be. And while I recognize that many Protestants do recognize that, I think it's an inconsistent position ultimately to believe on the one hand that the scriptures alone are the guide and authority. And then when you look at the historic church, you start to realize that they had bishops, they had a liturgy, they had tradition. And many of those churches for many centuries didn't have a full Bible, right? The canon of scripture was debated for many, many centuries. So how is the church working? How is it functioning? How is it being the church when it didn't have the foundation stone of the Bible, right? If it only had some of the text or whatever. And eventually that kind of led me out of the world of Calvinism and Protestantism. But that was back in 2003, and the internet wasn't, as prevalent as it is now. So all I knew about at the time was the Protestant Roman Catholic kind of debate. And so I read all the Protestant critiques that I could find of the Roman Catholic Church, and then I read all the Roman Catholic apologists that I could find at the time, all the Scott Hahns and the Syngenis and the Creefs and the Matetics and all those people. And so eventually I just kind of read my way out of Protestantism, but I didn't know about Vatican II. I didn't know about, all of the problems of the papacy and the history of the papacy and the pre-Vatican II encyclicals. I had not read any of that stuff. And so I was in the normal Novus Ordo Roman Catholic world for about 2 or 3 years. And I started realizing that that something is weird here, because I'm seeing hip hop masses, I'm seeing clown masses, I'm seeing stuff that is worse than even some of the Anglican churches. It didn't make any sense. How this is not matching up with the church fathers. So that got me into the world of traditional Catholicism for many years. I went to the Society of St. Pius X's Latin Mass for about 7 years. I think I would drive to Memphis or Nashville to go to the Latin Mass. And then eventually it just became evident to me. I read all of Vatican II. I read most of the councils. I read huge portion of the pre-Vatican II papal encyclicals, and it just looked to me like there was 2 different things being taught here. The post-Vatican II church was something new. I know all the arguments about trying to find continuity between pre and post-Vatican II, but eventually it just didn't become convincing to me because, there's just so many places like Pius XI's encyclical Mortalium Animos, where he says that to have these interfaith prayer meetings are apostasy. He says they're a surrendering of the faith. And to say that the Apostolic See could surrender the faith, really, Vatican I makes that impossible. So how can the Apostolic See, which is promised in Vatican I to be in perpetuity with all of its powers and charism until the end of the world, how could it apostatize and not be the Roman Catholic See anymore? The chief cornerstone of the church. So for me, it just didn't add up anymore. And that doesn't leave a whole lot of options, when you look at the world of, because I was not ever going to go back to Protestant. But so there's Orthodoxy. And then I had visited a lot
But if you go back to the Protestant church, you can be your own pope, can't you? I'm only joking for the Protestant people that are watching. But I did hear a joke that was pretty good, that the non-denominationals are the Protestants of the Protestants.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah, I was in a pretty. I went from Baptist to a more historic Protestantism, right? So I got into Presbyterianism and the Westminster Confession and these older kind of like Lutheran, Protestant, Calvinist debates from centuries ago. But that was just kind of a halfway house until I read myself, into older church history and the church fathers. And so it's pretty evident when you read the church fathers that they're not Protestant. It's pretty obvious. So you've only got, after that, you're either going to be Roman Catholic or you're going to be Orthodox.
So what role, especially in the USA, where the Orthodox were 1.5% or 3% of the population, that doesn't even count devout. That's just people who identify. What role do you think that Orthodoxy has in the future, where the tribulations are coming, at least in the USA? I mean, does it have a role to play, or are we just too few in number that we're always going to be this niche ethnic kind of church that, doesn't really make a difference in the direction of perhaps trying to reverse or handle some of the evil that is happening within the country?
No, I think that as things get worse, we're going to see people turning to the church. I think that it's going to be more and more evident which churches are more faithful to tradition and stand out. So I think that, especially in the world of Protestantism, the reason that you see so many people converting to Catholicism and Orthodoxy is because they're looking for authenticity. They're looking for tradition. They're looking for something that's not Joel Osteen's made up thing, self-help crap. They want something authentic. So that's what promotes and prompts a lot of people to look into the historic quote unquote churches. And really, I think because I believe the Orthodox Church is the true church, I think that they're really the only ones that are going to stand as things get worse. And so it's going to draw people. No doubt the Orthodox Church, especially in America, has its share of problems. There's no doubt about that. I'll be the first to complain about those problems and talk about them. But I think that we have the means to weather the coming storms, ironically, because we're neither Protestant nor Roman Catholic. We're not either one. So we're not susceptible to the just crazy splintering factions that you get in the Protestant world, like you said, of just anybody can start a strip mall. But at the same time, we're not susceptible to the house of cards model of the papacy, where if you get the office of the papacy co-opted, like the whole thing's screwed over, right? So the decentralized yet at the same time hierarchical model of the Orthodox Church, I think, is what is its strength, ironically. And when you look at the ecumenical councils, the first 7, and you read the canons, this is very enlightening. I think that only the Orthodox Church really consistently operates still the same way that the church for the first millennium operated, because the canons have all kinds of things that the Roman Catholics and the Protestants don't follow. For example, there's bishops, there's norms about how you do the liturgy, about the Eucharist, about worship. All those things are in the ancient canons of the church. Limits on bishops, limits on the papacy in the ancient canons that even the Roman Catholic Church accepts. Very bizarre, like Canon 6 of Nicaea. So I think that we have the pedigree, if we will be faithful, and if we want to, we could reap a giant harvest as a result of the coming trials that are I'm sure going to come in America.
Now, what would you say to someone who is watching, who maybe is not following Christ right now, but knows there is a spiritual element to what is going on, who wants to get closer to the faith, but now churches are closed? What kind of advice do you have for them, who's not a total fedora tipping atheist? It's like, there is no God, I'm sure of it. Who's kind of has one foot, who wants to feel that spiritual essence that God gave us. What would you tell them? And when you give this answer, I'm going to step aside for 1 second to use the bathroom, but just keep on talking. Okay?
Yeah. There is a great documentary I would recommend called The Icon. It's a 7-part documentary, and that's a good introduction to not just like the pretty art of Orthodoxy, but it's an introduction to the idea and the ethos of Orthodoxy, right? The aesthetic of Orthodoxy and how it ties into culture. That documentary gets pretty deep into culture, iconography, imagery, how we should view these kinds of things, and how the modern world, since it dispensed with the tradition of iconography, has replaced it with advertising. So you can find the documentary on YouTube. It's a really good introduction to our worldview. It's just called The Icon, 7-part documentary. It's like 3 hours long or so. That's a good place to start. If you're more of a scientifically minded person who's open to maybe physics and math showing the existence of God, there's a good book that points in that direction called The Mind of God by Paul Davies. He's not explicitly arguing for like the transcendental argument or something like that, but what he does is he looks at physics, he looks at math, and he says, there's a lot in these domains that point us to, something more going on that suggests a mind, right? An omniscient, divine mind. That's a good book for people that are just kind of like broaching the subject and are open-minded. Something more culturally critique-oriented, I would say read Father Seraphim Rose's book, Nihilism, because if you like the kind of critique that Roosh gave in his talks on COVID or his other cultural critiques, or if you like the critiques that I do, what Seraphim Rose does in that book is critique how society's revolutionary philosophies have kind of led us to the point where we are. And so he does in the first chapter actually a presuppositional critique of the philosophy of nihilism, the philosophy of revolution, and how it actually progresses to darker and darker and darker phases into like perfect nihilism or full-on satanic nihilism. So those are good books that cover like the aesthetic realm of Orthodoxy in terms of the icon, or the intellectual realm with Paul Davies on the Mind of God and physics and mathematics, or a cultural critique from Father Seraphim Rose. Those are all good ones.
Great. And I'm sure your answer was superb. Okay, and one of the last questions, I have two more, and thank you for. Are you on a time crunch, or
No.
do you have a little bit more time? Okay.
Sure.
So, are there any men today you may have already answered this, but men today in the Orthodox world that we should definitely follow, that we should look to, that is shining a bright light? Maybe not the ones in the past, the ones who serve at a monastery, who serve at a church, that we can seek guidance from, not just in book form.
Right.
Because that's kind of, and I just wanted to add how, one thing that the Orthodox Church teaches is how important it is to have a spiritual elder, but how difficult it is to find one, especially in a country like the U.S. So this has been a sticking point for me. I feel like without a spiritual elder, I'm flying blind. And I have to find out the hard way that that was not actually from God. That was a deception I fell for. And now I have to backtrack and things such as that. But if you know anyone in the Orthodox world that we can point people towards, I think that would be helpful.
Somebody who's been, I've had many people who've offered a lot of spiritual guidance, so I don't want to sell anybody short. I mean, there have been some important people along the way who've lent their aid and their support and their blessing. I appreciate Metropolitan Jonah for his kind words and support. And I would say also Father Peter Heers has been a very important advisor and guide in my journey in my life. He's very serious about his spiritual walk. He's respected and known by quite a few people. He spends a lot of time in Greece. He spent a lot of time at Mount Athos. So I would say that Father Peter is a really, really great guide for people. I always tell people I'm not an elder and I'm not your spiritual father, so don't come to me for like the. All I do is talk philosophy and do apologetics. But you need to find that kind of a spiritual guide, on your own. And Father Peter Heers is definitely somebody I'd recommend. He's got a lot of great books. But like you said, beyond the books, he will point people to elders and like spiritual guides, people that can help people on a more spiritual level.
Okay, and the last question before we get to the super chats, and you have quite a few, Jay, is what what is your main do you have a main concern, a fear that keeps you up at night, that troubles you, that you are trying to work on, or a concern you have for the world? I mean, we already talked about a lot of problems, but something specific that kind of maybe you prey on, that you're looking to endure.
The hardest thing that I worry about is my own spiritual sin and state. And I don't say that to be like, oh, I'm so pious, everyone listen to me. But I mean, that really is the main struggle I have, is that I don't really feel like I should be doing this kind of stuff. I mean, I haven't been coerced into it, but I mean, I don't feel like I'm really worthy to represent this kind of theology. I think some people think that I just grabbed this and I wanted to do it. I'm trying to see some kind of trend, but it's not that way at all. I would really much rather be doing purely comedic things. I get the most fun and joy out of just doing comedic stuff, Sam Hyde type stuff. That's what's fun to me, just kind of being a goofball. But I feel like a lot of gifts have been given to me to that I need to present this kind of material, that I need to discourse with atheists. I actually don't find doing debates with atheists fun. It's very tedious. I really get tired of it. But so that's what weighs on me, is that I don't really feel up to doing a lot of this stuff, but I feel like I'm supposed to in a weird way. But so that's why I try to direct people to other people. Father Peter Heers has a great podcast called Orthodox Ethos. So don't listen to me, go listen to him for spiritual advice. But I'm not positive, that like, are we in the end times? It could be. I'm not 100% positive. I just did a stream the other day on that, giving my thoughts on whether I think it could be. I don't know. But I hope not. So I hope we're not in the final days. But if we are, Lord, come quickly, I guess, as Paul says.